Okie dokie. This is an attempt to make a more concise version of the video I uploaded last night, which went through in great detail Bob Lazar, his backstory, his claims, and all of the available evidence that now exists to debunk them. But man, oh man, been wanting to do this for a long time. Really glad I'm finally taking the time to do so. So this cut is just going to be different because I'm going to more or less skip over Bob's backstory. This video is for people that already know the broad strokes and who simply want to have the various what I call gotchas of his story debunked or sourced. Because the truth of the matter is, in 2021, every element, no pun intended, of Lazar's story can be easily debunked or sourced. And by sourced, what I mean is you can figure out where in ufology or where in the wild he would have gotten the idea to include it in his story. So just to briefly touch on it, the general story, Bob claims to be a dual master's educated physicist who first worked at Los Alamos on propulsion, and then after relocating to Nevada, was handpicked by Edward Teller to be read into a classified program that studied crashed flying saucers in the desert at a base called what he said was S4. So he claimed to have worked there for not too long. I think it's 3 to 6 months overall, somewhat infrequently, trying to reverse engineer alien craft with very little success, only to get himself fired for taking his friends out into the desert. Why would you do that if you were actually legit? But taking him out to the desert to videotape what he claimed was a flying saucer test mission. So, assuming if you're watching this, you already know the broad strokes of the story. So what I'm going to do is kind of run through the different pieces of it. Because again, I spent a lot of time researching Lazar and finding the documentation that goes with his story. So, this document here, in my opinion, sums up what I think about Bob Lazar very well. This is from his court hearing. I'm not going to get into the pandering thing other than acknowledging that it did exist, which would make him ineligible for a top secret clearance. But when they researched him, they came to the conclusion that it is the contention of this department that the defendant is no more than an intelligent con man who has totally fictionalized his prior academic and employment history to further his own interests. And when it comes to Big Bad Bobby Lazar, I kind of agree. I think he's just a hustler. Most of his plays seem to be financially, tied into financials and scams of some sort, and who knows why he initially came up with the story or what he was looking to get from it. In my opinion, it got away from him, became much bigger than he wanted to, or much more attention was put on it, and he backpedaled it unsuccessfully. But yeah. So, for what it's worth, if I'm missing any part of the story that you would like me to touch on, let me know in the comments. This is new. I'm obviously a new channel, new to all of this, and I'm doing this completely unscripted, off the cuff. So let's get into it. Element 115. What is Element 115? So Lazar claims that the flying saucers at Area 51 were powered by Element 115. And why this is important is because at the time, Element 115 had not been proven to exist, hadn't been synthesized or fully confirmed. However, so in theory, that it has now since been synthesized in Russia, I think in 2010 or 2012, I forget the year, but it was made. It was very, very different from what he said it would be like. He claims to have physically had it. He said that there was like a disc of this element that powered the flying saucer, and that he also stole some. He claims to have it in his possession, but that he refuses to show it to anyone. But Bob first made a TV appearance. I'll give you a guess when. His very first appearance on TV was May of 1989. Why is this important? Scientific American, magazine that a guy like Lazar would almost certainly be reading, had an article that month about speculative super heavy elements. And one of the ones that is discussed in this article is 115. So basically, the same month that Lazar came out with his story, Scientific American featured that exact idea. And Lazar is very clever with this. He's very good at picking things that are likely going to turn out to be true anyway, or that are just not widely known about but will be in the future, and then pointing to them and saying that retroactively backs up his claims. Like, well, look, no one knew about 115 in 1989, but it turned out to be real. An analogy I make with this is if I said that I worked on a top secret program where we had TVs that were 16K in resolution, and if they ever make those, it's going to prove that I was telling the truth because hey, they didn't exist, and then they do now. But really, you're just banking on something that's a near guarantee. Clearly in 1989, it was already being speculated that these things would turn out to be real, and lo and behold, they did. Doesn't prove anything. So element 115, in my mind, is totally bunk. Like, if he has it in his possession, show it. It's that simple. At this point, he's really got nothing to lose by doing so. If he was going to be charged for breaking any of his classified confidentiality agreements, he would have been. He has not been. So that's where that came from. Totally bunk. So Zeta. Why bring up Zeta Reticuli or Reticula, whatever it is? He claimed when he first was at S4, like the first day he was working there on this program, that he sat down in a room and they gave him some documents that kind of summarized the history of the program or what they had found. And that the aliens were from Zeta Reticula. It doesn't explain how they know that or where that information came from. But why is this important? So Betty and Barney Hill was the first and easily the most publicized alien abduction case of all time. It was, I think, 1961. They claimed that they were taken on board a ship. Standard abduction scenario like we hear about all the time. Taken on the ship, they're probed, or there's medical stuff that goes on, then they're dumped back off, they're missing time. But the wife specifically, Betty, she said that she was shown a star map. She asked the aliens, where are you from? And they showed her a chart that looked something like this. Strangely enough, it wasn't her that said the aliens were from Zeta, but it was actually another woman named, I think it's Pauline Lovelace is maybe what her name was. She became kind of obsessed with the Betty and Barney Hill story, and she hung ping pong balls up in her living room, trying to figure out, what that star map showed and from what perspective. And eventually, she came to the conclusion that the aliens were from Zeta. So, why do I bring this up in regards to Bob? In my opinion, when he decided to come forward with a UFO story, he very likely went to the library or he kind of educated himself on UFO lore. He was also friends with a guy named John Lear, who's kind of a crazy UFO buff. So some of that could have come secondhand from him. But point being that if you were coming up with a story like this in 1989, and you went to the library and looked up alien abductions or sort of alien lore, it's very, very likely that you would see Zeta as a reoccurring theme. I think it also features in the Majestic 12 stuff as well, but that's where that comes from. Betty, Barney Hill. So in my opinion, totally bunk. Again, easily sourced and easy to figure out why he got that idea. The next gotcha. So Lazar claims, well, we didn't claim, he actually didn't. Lazar worked at a place called Los Alamos National Laboratory. It's a very prestigious government facility where they do a lot of crazy high-end science stuff. But the gotcha here is that he claims the government, and people always cite this as like, this is why Lazar is telling the truth, man, I swear. The government went and deleted his records just like they said. So when the story first came out, George Knapp, who was the reporter that broke the story, said that he had contacted Los Alamos to verify Bob's employment, and that they said they had no idea who he was or no record of him working there. But what they leave out is that Bob did work at Los Alamos. He just did not work for Los Alamos. And what I mean by that is he was a contract employee for a company called Kirk Meyer, and he was a technician, which I believe is probably copy machines or computer IT type stuff. So at no point did Los Alamos lab itself deny Lazar worked there. They just denied that he worked for the lab itself, which he did not. He worked as a contractor, which completely would explain why his number was in the phone book with a KM next to it. It would explain how he knew his way around, because he did work at the facility, but it's pretty cut and dry. This information wasn't shared initially because it didn't really make for a good story. The whole conspiratorial records being erased thing is kind of what a lot of is kind of how they sell a lot of the stuff. But again, this one's cut and dry. I mean, it's not even up for debate. He wasn't a physicist at Los Alamos. He was a technician. He worked for Kirk Meyer. Who knows what he actually did? Again, I found the job listing at one point, and it largely was like fixing copy machines and fax machines, maybe, or computer stuff. But again, pretty cut and dry. So KM contractor, totally bunk. So the next part of Lazar's story is that he, through sheer coincidence, and this is actually true, I believe, a guy named Edward Teller was giving a speech at the lab itself, which Bob attended, and it was coincidentally the same day that he was in the paper for his supposed jet car. The jet car did exist, although he did exaggerate the engine that was on it. If you want to learn about that, you can go to this fantastic site, Bob Lazar Debunked. He gets into the specifics of that, but to me that's not really too relevant. Like, he says to the paper that he's a physicist there, so that's what they show him as in the article, but obviously they're not going to do any they're not going to call the lab to confirm that he is a physicist for a story like this. But anyway, he meets Edward Teller, introduces himself, they talk. I guess they trade information, and when Lazar moves to Nevada, he contacts Edward Teller. This was pretty common back in the day. You would mail letters out to contacts you had saying, hey, do you have any work, or do you know anyone who's looking for this? So his claim is that he contacts Edward Teller, and that Edward Teller refers him into this alien program. So again, the Los Alamos employment we've touched on. S4 we'll touch on even more in a second, but I'm going to put Edward Teller. I'm going to summarize this part because there's one crucial thing I left out. So he did meet Teller. It's possible even that Teller referred him for some kind of work, because there is a small amount of evidence to show that Bob possibly worked off-site at a civilian facility checking badges near Area 51. There's not enough information on that to conclusively put it here as like objective fact, but there's a lot of strong circumstantial evidence for that. But for Bob to go to S4 or Area 51, I mean Area 51 does exist, or S4 if it existed, he would need a top secret clearance. Problem is, Bob had declared bankruptcy before moving from New Mexico to Nevada, which makes you ineligible for life to get a top secret clearance. And he was also arrested, so that charge would have also prevented him from having a clearance, although I think he got arrested after. Again, I'm not going to touch on the pandering thing too much, but so Bob was bankrupt right before he basically did a hit and run on New Mexico before he left. You can see the details of what he did here. And the reason I bring this up is you can kind of see some intent here. I'm not going to judge Bob as a person in this video, but I do think it says something about his state of mind when he takes out these lines of credit. He doesn't ever attempt to even pay any of it. He owes his parents, he owes some friends, banks, his employer. So like this one's $60,000, he pays back $1,300. $80,000 mortgage, he makes one payment for $750. That shows to me that the intent was always to get these lines of credit and hit and run and declare bankruptcy. It's not like he was trying to pay it down, and then got overwhelmed. He was grifting from the start here. And I think it's pretty hard to argue with that, but it's even more relevant because no TS clearance if you're bankrupt just wouldn't happen, and therefore the chance that someone like Bob would be employed at Area 51 or something even more secret is just completely out of the question. Would not happen. And Bob's story is that he was working on it before they'd done his background check or finished it, which is, I'm not in the military, so military people feel free to correct me. I don't see that being possible, but hey, who knows? Because bankrupt. On to S4 itself. So another gotcha is that, Area 51 was known about, but it wasn't household knowledge like it is now at the time. The fact that he named Area 51 isn't too remarkable in itself. So the idea of S4, Bob claims that S4 was a secret hangar cut into the side of a mountain south of the proper Area 51 base itself, and that there's like 9 hangars. They're camouflaged with the desert. Couple problems with this. Again, this is actually a very clever gotcha by him, and I'll explain why. my understanding is that every military site like Area 51, every base like that is divided up into sections. I believe I had a outline of, or no, it's in here, it's in the article. So every base is split up into different sites or areas like this. So it's more or less a guarantee that a Site 4 or Area 4 would exist at a base like this. You know, just like there's going to be an S1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it turns out S4 is actually a radar installation. It's not where Bob said it was. Now, granted, if the alien shit was true, obviously, I don't think it would be on a map like this. But there's another problem with S4. Little guy named Jerry Freeman. This dude's a fucking legend. So this was a guy who was, I believe, terminally ill, and he was very into, he was like following old trails that people had used, like Oregon Trail type shit, to reenact some sort of like 1800s thing. I don't remember the specifics of it, but he was dying, and one of his last things to do on his bucket list was that he was going to complete this trail that now, you know, goes through the exact area of Area 51 where Bob claimed S4 was. So even though it was illegal and he knew that he might get in a shit ton of trouble for doing it, this dude said fuck it because he's dying anyway. So he actually went and traveled through the area, went and looked specifically at where the supposed base was, you know, the hangar, and guess what? You're never going to believe this, but there's nothing there. To me, that makes it pretty cut and dry, but again, were there a hangar like Bob said? Who knows, you know, how much obfuscation goes into it, but at the very least, it's not where Bob said it was. And, you know, likely does not exist at all. To me, it's totally bunk, but since we don't have quite the objective level of proof like we do for other things, I'm going to not say 100%. I'm going to say 90%. The one piece of Bob's story that maybe gives a bit of credibility is Janet Airlines. What that is, Janet is an airline that flies from McCarran, which is the Las Vegas airport, to Area 51 every day. That's where, or that's how employees get to the base and back. I don't think it was widespread knowledge that it existed at the time, but I'm sure, especially because Bob hung out at bars and, you know, kind of posed in that scene or tried to around military or people, other scientists, you know, it doesn't strike me as unlikely that he would have heard about it. You know, Janet, I don't think they have like a special terminal. Janet stands for not another, or just another non-existent terminal. So this one, I'll say, you know, rumors, second hands, can't say totally bunk, but I'll say, you know, 90% chance he found it out from talking to people. Now we're going to get to some very objective gotchas. The hand scanner. Bob talked about how to get into the classified section of the base or wherever they store the UFOs. You know, there's a hand scanner that they were using that reads the bone density in your hand. And sounds really good. Coincidentally, that device was used at some military installations, but unfortunately, it was advertised as early as, I believe, 1971 was when they began selling this. So it's called the Identimat 2000. It did what he said. You know, it's a hand scanner that uses bone density. Apparently, it was really shitty and inaccurate, and the military had all kinds of problems with it. But it was advertised in computer magazines. Let me... Identimat. So that, you know, here's an article about it in Computer World from 1971. So again, if you were reading the type of magazines and shit that Bob would have been at the time, it doesn't strike me as unlikely at all that he would have seen this. Also, even more damningly, it was used in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I don't remember exactly what scene this is, but there's a scene where they're checking themselves into some super secure facility, and what do they use? Identimat 2000. So, you know, Bob reading a 1971 Computer World? Probably unlikely, he wasn't born yet. But again, it was advertised all over the place, up through the 70s and 80s, but more likely is that he saw this in Close Encounters of the Third Kind and then went and found out what it was, if he didn't already know. So sadly, in my mind, totally bunk, public knowledge, existed for decades. So again, nothing so far out of his claims is unique and or proven. Moving along. His education. I don't even know where to start from with this. The TLDR, he has no proof of going to school. There is proof that he went to junior college at a place called Pierce Junior College. Stanton Friedman, who was one of the most legit UFO guys around, he definitely died on the MJ-12 hill, and rest in peace, he did recently pass away, but he really doubted Lazar. He pressured him to give some information. When did you go to school? Who taught you? This is the only instance I can ever find of Lazar stating when he went to school or who taught him. The teacher he named was from his junior college or his high school, I believe. Never taught at Caltech or MIT. Both schools have no record of him going there. He's never been able to name a teacher there. Any other students, anyone who might remember him, there's no yearbooks that show him. And on even more damningly, you can read about this, Dreamland Resort has the complete timeline. He was living in the wrong places to go to those schools at those times. So, in my mind, there's just a 0% chance that he attended those schools. There's no evidence of it. And this is a guy who, produced, now albeit it's fake, we'll get into that in a second, but, a pay stub from when he was working at the base, supposedly. He has a mock-up of his badge. He keeps, newspaper cutouts from his jet car days, but he doesn't have his degree or any records that he went to school where he said he did. That inconsistency to me is very, very weird. But, how was he attending those schools when he wasn't even living in the state? Pretty tough to figure out. Now, I think, maybe he was just padding his resume, trying to get better jobs than he was going to otherwise get, and people do that. I don't agree with it, but in my mind, it would have actually given him some credibility if he said, hey, look, I made up that shit about MIT and Caltech, but I was just doing it to pad my resume and get a better salary or a better job. But the rest of my stuff is true. The rest of it is all true. In my mind, that's actually, it's believable at the very least, but he refuses to budge on this, claims he's got masters. I think Stanton Friedman even said that the 2 degrees he has are like one school wouldn't let him. On top of the fact that he was a terrible student with shit records, and that there's just no way he would ever be admitted. If he had gotten the master's from one school, the other school wouldn't have let him into a master's program. I don't know. I didn't go to college, so I don't know the specifics there. Again, I'm not judging him in this regard, but it's just the inconsistencies and the impossibilities of it just make this a non-starter for me. College, totally bunk, 0% chance. I would bet my life on it. I'm going to move the doesn't make money thing till the end. The W-2. So, he has shown this W-2 is like, hey, I don't have too much, but I did find this old pay stub from when I was working there, and this is who paid me. Problem is, this is the wrong department. Apparently, I'm not super familiar with this, but if there was an OMB number on it, there wouldn't be another one. So this is problematic right here. It's very weird. This is like a week or two of pay, which, okay, doesn't really tell us all that much, but it's fake. There is a version out there that shows the social security number because it's an actual real person's. I'm not going to do that, but Lazar was born in 74. The prefix is wrong. Someone claims, I think it was Tom Mahood, if not him, maybe other hand. Actually, I don't know what resources they use, but they looked into this, and the social security number is some Chinese woman. So this is a fake document. Someone actually mailed the actual department that he would have supposedly been working for, and they clarify the issues with this pay stub, the inconsistencies that would make it not real. Now again, to be fair, I'm sure if there was a secret alien reverse engineer program, maybe the paperwork and standards are different. But given what we have, certainly doesn't look that way. Who knows how the people who work on these things for real, if they're even for real, how they get paid. But the department themselves confirms the issues with the pay stub, why it's fake. If you want, all these documents are going to be included in a link in the description of the video. If you want all of it, it's all there for you. So that's the W-2. I'm going to say provably fake. Bunk. You're welcome to disagree on this because, again, who knows who pays you if you work on flying saucers and how much and from where, but because he's representing himself as being paid from that institution, you would think the pay stubs would match the actual format they use, and they do not. The UFO footage, unfortunately, I can't show it to you because it's now, I believe, copyright protected into Jeremy Corbell's awful shit fucking trash documentary about Lazar and flying saucers. But hasn't been debunked, I will give you that. But it doesn't really, I mean, maybe we can get like a screenshot. It doesn't show anything remarkable. It's a night sky with like a dot. It's basically this, you know, oh, maybe this is it? Like, sure, because they're saying we filmed this at Area 51 and it's a UFO, that's what we see. But if we stop to really think about it, this could be so many things. And since so many other aspects of his story have been lies or totally bunk, to me, this doesn't really, it doesn't do much for me. Again, I can't say it is or is not fake, but we don't have any frame of reference. We don't, you know, there's nothing to compare it to, you know, from size perspective. All we see is a white light in the dark. And to me, I'm just going to say that the footage itself it's just ambiguous. There's no other way to put it. Like, doesn't prove anything, doesn't disprove anything. It's pretty meaningless. But supposedly this is the footage that got him fired because he took his friends out into the desert to see it, and they do verify that they saw some stuff. I don't want to speak on the credibility of his friends. It's very possible that they were seeing something out in the desert that wasn't a flying saucer. There's a great theory about this on a site called Other Hands, where they were testing apparently proton beams at that same time, and Lazar may have known that. But again, the footage itself, if this were anyone else's footage and someone submitted it to the subreddit, they would get clowned on right away because it's a white light with nothing in it. But because it's from Lazar, people treat it differently, and we shouldn't. Take it objectively within the reference that we get. Almost done. This is a pretty recent one. He was raided by the FBI, I believe, in 2018? 19. I think around or during the release of the documentary, he was raided by the FBI. And the strong implication, if you watch that documentary, is that this was done to steal back the Element 115 that he had because him and Jeremy had been talking about it, or maybe they revealed where it was stashed. Sounds good. If he actually had that, not only could he bring a little piece of it forward and prove his entire story in a single go-round, you would think it would be a bigger deal because he would have stolen it from a classified facility. He'd be in jail. But raid is actually much more simple. Turns out, Lazar runs a business called United Nuclear. What they are is a chemical and equipment wholesaler for chemistry and other stuff like that. And they sell a lot of very dangerous things without really caring who they're selling them to. He was already popped once prior to this for selling chemicals that are used to make illegal fireworks. I think he paid a fine for that. But with the FBI raid, what happened was he sold a chemical called, I believe it's thallium? Yes, thallium. He sold a chemical named thallium to a dude. Thallium is super toxic, it's basically poison, and lo and behold, I believe it was his wife, the dude murdered somebody with it. The authorities reverse engineered, no pun intended, well actually no pun intended, no, that's a lie. They reverse engineered that the thallium came from Bob, so they raided him, and basically it was done to see, like, is he knowingly selling risky shit to people without caring about it, because that is a crime. It might not be a controlled substance like illegal drugs or pharmaceuticals, but like if you knowingly are selling dangerous stuff in an unregulated manner, it's a crime. So the fact that this happened during the documentary is just sheer coincidence, and you're free to believe that there's men in black there if you want, but there's a ton of evidence and documentation showing what the raid was about. One of his employees even went on Reddit and said, hey, I work at United Nuclear, this is why they raided us, blah, blah, blah. You can go find that if you want, or maybe I'll link to it. But in my mind, it's bunk. I think in everyone's mind it should be. It's related to a murder. So last but not least, he has continuously made a claim that he doesn't do this for money. He claims to sort of not be a UFO guy. He wasn't before this thing, and he's reluctant to talk about it. He definitely doesn't want to monetize the story and make money from it, because in his mind that would take away from the credibility of it. The only problem with this is that he monetizes the shit out of it. I mean, on his business right now, he sells alien memorabilia. So, starting from the beginning, initially they sold a VHS tape through mail order. My dog gets upset when I talk about Lazar. I'm sorry. They sold a VHS tape called the Lazar tapes. You can find that on YouTube. He sold model spaceships, posters, autographed posters, multiple documentaries, multiple speaking rights. So, truth be told, he does monetize it. But he has done much less monetization than he probably could have. I mean, if you Google a UFO documentary, the third thing that comes up for me, at least, is Bob Lazar's documentary with Jeremy Corbell. And that's recent. That's 2019. So yeah, maybe he only monetized 10 or 20% of the story in terms of what he could have done versus what he did. But he's made a shit ton of money from this and has done so all along. So this idea that he doesn't make money, it sounds good, but if you think about it, it's just not true. He totally does. Totally makes money. This is bunk. That more or less rounds out the story. Again, there's sort of a longer form of this where I rant a bit more about his backstory and I get a bit more in depth of documentation. You're welcome to watch that if you want. This is all new. First time making videos. I'm doing it all without a script, as I said, because I want to make it clear that it's a subject that I'm familiar with, that I don't need my research or notes to make sure I accurately convey it. So if you found this engaging or remotely helpful, or it potentially at least made you ask some questions, I've done the job I hoped to do. My next presentation / video is going to be about Stephen Greer. And to be fair, or just to make sure it's clear, I'm a believer in this general topic. I think that there are UFOs. I think there have been possible, we'll call them non-human intelligences that have visited the Earth. I think, it only takes one of these stories out of millions for that to be a very real thing. But with people like Lazar in the forefront of the topic, it just does everyone such a disservice, and especially new and casual people who are just now picking up the topic because it's been gaining steam in the media over the last few years. The fact that they have to immediately sort through Lazar's bullshit when they first enter the topic, to me, is just so fucking frustrating. So the reason I care is because I would like to change that. And I hope that maybe in some way I did. But yeah, that's the video. If I missed anything, if there's gotchas that I need to go over, let me know in the comments. There's nothing I would not be willing to look into or discuss. And thank you for your time. If you watched it and made it this far, I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to making more for you. Rock and roll will never die, baby. Let's do it.